Olá pessoal, sejam bem-vindos a mais um programa, mais uma entrevista aqui do canal Investigação OVNI. Dessa vez eu tenho aqui para vocês um grande entrevistado, um colega ufólogo que eu conheci em 2012 no Foz, lá em Foz do Iguaçu, Gary Heseltine. Ele é fundador do PRUFOS, que é o Banco de Dados Policial de Avistamento de OVNIs da Polícia. É um banco de dados nacional não oficial dedicado para policiais do Reino Unido e da Irlanda que relatam seus avistamentos de OVNIs. Nós vamos falar sobre isso também. Esse banco de dados foi lançado em 2002. Ele também é fundador da UFO Magazine, lançado em 2013. Fundador também do Police Pressure, que foi lançado em abril de 2013, que é um site dedicado a oferecer suporte e ajuda a policiais em todo o Reino Unido que sofrem com estresse. É também ex-editor da revista internet ufomonthly.com e também ex-coeditor da revista UFO Data. Então, espero que vocês gostem. Deem umas boas-vindas ao nosso querido Gary. Hi Gary, how are you? And thank you very much to be here with us.
Thank you for inviting me on, Tiago, anytime.
Well, I can see that you have a lot of background, you know. I thought you just have the UFO magazine, UFO Truth magazine was the first publication, but you have two others magazines, very interesting.
Yeah, I never set out to go down the role of a magazine editor. It's just that when I began my active research with the police database, PRUFOS, I got to know the editor of UFO Magazine, which was a printed magazine in England, and it went all around the world, and it was really popular. And then suddenly, after 2 years of getting to know him, the editor died of a cerebral hemorrhage, and he was only 49. And so there was a great void left behind. Now, I didn't have to do something, so I started dabbling in 2004 with a little online magazine called UFOmonthly.com, and I ended up doing that for about 3.5 years, 41 issues. So that was, in a sense, a strange quirk of fate that put me on a path, and here I am all these years later, obviously much better at it, more experienced, and it's strange how life goes. And I never used to hear the word. I used to, when I first started to go public about my police research, people would talk about synchronicities, and I had never really heard of the word synchronicity before. But the more I've done this, the more strange synchronicities there are, and so I almost feel as if something compels me, and I'm not religious, but something compels me to do what I do, and who knows where that will end.
That's great. But have you had any UFO experience, or
Yes.
you just began with the magazine?
No, I had a sighting when I was 16 years old. And briefly, I'll explain. I was walking my then girlfriend home. I was 16, she was 16. We were walking along a darkly lit long footpath. And one side was the school, and my school, and the school fields. And on the other side, there was a big vegetation area, and there was this long footpath that went through the middle. And as we were walking back to her home, we suddenly saw a really bright white 60-degree angle moving from right to left. And as soon as it passed by us, so therefore we were then behind it, all the housing, the power in the housing in the distance was cut off, power grid failing. And so everything went dark, and then we watched it a little bit further, and then there was a second power cut. Everything went dark. Now, at the time, I was pushing my bicycle. As we were walking, I was pushing my bicycle. So I said, get on the bike, onto the crossbar, boy's bike, crossbar, And the two of us, rode quickly to the end of the footpath, and then her home was about 300 metres away from the end of the footpath. I dropped her off. I then pedalled like mad back down the same footpath that we'd been on in the direction of my home, because that's where the light was moving. And I got onto the road and I'm pedaling like mad, and everything is pitch black. Street lamps off, power off, it is total darkness. I'm racing along and the light is on my right and I'm trying to catch it up, moving very slowly. Eventually, near to my home, there is a bend in the road to the left. So I'm going, and then just near this bend, I look to my right and I've managed to get slightly ahead of the light. And at the point where I was, when I looked over my right shoulder, the power was on. So I was in front of the light. So I went from darkness, and on this corner, the power and everything in front was on. I look to my right and the object is slightly behind me. So it's gone at an angle very slowly, and I've managed to get ahead of it. I go around 2 corners, maybe another 200 metres, and I drop my house outside number 3 Baysdale Road, which is the beginning of the road. I rush inside to my parents and said, "Come outside, there's a strange light. I think there's going to be a power cut." And they just looked at me as if to say, "You're stupid." And they didn't move. So I ran through the house, through the hall, out through the back door, down to the bottom of my garden, turned around to look back at my house, just in time to see the light coming over my roof. And it was a bit higher elevation at this point. And so what I did, and I don't know why I did it, is I put my hand up as if I was answering a question in class and made like a 90 degrees. And guess what? As soon as that object went past my arm, entire area plunged into darkness, power cut. Now, how can I predict power cut? It's ridiculous. So I realized that whatever that light was, it must have interacted with the power grid, because I'd moved from one geographical position to another, and I can't predict power cut. So that light had done the power cut, in my opinion. Did I do anything about it? My parents were just rushing around getting candles. They just said, "Oh, it's a coincidence, it's nothing." We weren't on the telephone, believe it or not, in those days. We're talking a long time ago, 1976. And so basically there was nothing I could do. Nobody really believed me, and but that's what kicked off my interest. Ever since then, I had an interest, and the first thing that I could do, the only thing that I could do, because of the way media was then, was go to a second-hand bookshop and look for books on flying saucers, UFOs. And here's another strange thing. The first book that I ever picked up was by Major Donald Kehoe, who is one of the founders, certainly in America and in English-speaking terms, one of the real pioneers of this field, and he wrote 5 books because of his military connections. And I thought, that's, of all the thousands of books that's been written then, I just happened to get that one. And even more bizarre was, inside that, reading that book, I found a reference to what's called the New York blackout of 1965, when UFOs were believed to have triggered power grid failures on the eastern seaboard for about 6 hours, and people were stuck in lifts, stuck on trains, etc., underground, etc. So all of that kind of, I look back at it and think somebody was giving me a sign that I had to do something. And that's really how it started, the interest, is from a childhood sighting.
Well, I don't think it was coincidence, you know. Well, it's very common, the blackout with UFOs. Yeah. And yeah. What was the size of that light? Is it bigger? Is it small?
It's hard to. I say it's a 60-degree angle. There was no definite shape. It was just a bright light, the most common thing ever seen. It was bigger than the background stars. Now, unusually, it was a warm summer's night, There was very little wind. There was not a cloud in the sky, and we had a lot of stars showing. But this object was moving silently, perhaps maybe 2,000–3,000 feet elevation. It had no distinct shape. It was just a bright white light.
Great. Gary, for many years, you were a police officer. Did you suffer any kind of professional?
If you hear a strange noise, it's my German Shepherd. They're saying to me, I want to go out. So carry on, carry on. I've just got to let them out, and I'll just sat down. It's right next to me. Right, carry on. Right, so I was a police officer for almost 24 years.
Yes. Did you suffer any kind of professional embarrassment or impediment or some kind of, blocks about your research?
Yes, but not initially. What happened was that I went public with my police database in 2002, January 2002. At that point, I was murder, manslaughter, rape, that kind of thing. I was a specialist officer. And my own force created what was called an intranet. It was like just coming in, and basically it was like there was a hobbies section, and people would say karate section, running club, and it was just like a hobbies section. So I thought, well, when I launch this database, I'm sure that there's police officers who've seen things, so I will just put up some information about some prominent cases from around the world and see if I get a reaction. And when I did that, people obviously were laughing and joking about it, but I did get some messages from around my force, from other police officers, so I knew that I'd touched a nerve. And initially, nobody was that bothered. I created the website, I put my photograph out there, I put my police details out there, my shoulder number, etc. And there was no hassle at first. But the more I became popular with the media, as I kept reporting cases, over a number of years, I started to get interference and more pressure being put on me. Suffice to say that eventually that was one of the reasons why I left early. I could have gone on for another 7 years, but I chose to retire early after nearly 24 years because they were getting more obstructive. And at one point, I got disciplined, and I could have lost my job, and it went to a real serious board because I had mentioned something about police officers, and my new boss of the whole force, the chief constable, he was embarrassed, and he said I had brought the force into disrepute. I had embarrassed the force. So he instructed my area commander to institute disciplinary procedures for me for bringing the force into disrepute. And so I was under investigation for a year, and they were trying to find anything to make it difficult. And I could have lost my job. Eventually, I didn't lose my job, but you cannot beat a big organization. If they want to get you to quit, they can get you to quit. So in the end, to preserve my pension, I accepted that a lesser form that I had embarrassed the force. Otherwise, I would have got sacked. But it was ridiculous. That's all I'd done, is say that the police officer had seen this and that and the other, and they said I'd contravened some little section. So it was really just a lot of pressure to try to stop me doing what I was doing. So eventually I realized that there was always going to be a risk that they would catch me out on something. And so basically I decided, no, I'll leave on my own terms. And by the time I retired with my previous military service, I had 27 years in the police pension fund. And so in policing terms, you have a 30-year full pension So I had a 27 years, so I think it was like a 94% pension fund. So there was enough to retire. So I chose to retire, and then I created the magazine, the Sim, within days of me leaving the police. And so that then became my new occupation, as it were. And it was the best thing that I've ever done. So it's great to be the full-time ufologist. There aren't many.
Yeah, I hope to have the opportunity to be as well 100% time ufologist. Well,
I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky.
Yeah, you created the PRUFOS.
Please,
Yeah,
police reporting. It stands for PRUFOS. Stands for Police Reporting UFOs.
Police reporting UFOs. Yeah, PRUFOS. And you get a lot of reports from police officers.
I did for a long time before I was doing the magazine. Now I get them occasionally because the magazine is my primary focus. But between 2002 and 2013, I got hundreds of reports. I think the final total, the total that we are at the moment is around 550 reports, all UK police officers, going back to 1901, involving over 1,100 police officers, British police officers. Whoa. So that's a lot. Yeah, and that's what my force didn't like, is that the more you were showing that these things were going on and being seen, it seemed that somebody higher above was saying, we don't want this kind of publicity. So I think that's what it was really all about.
And can you tell us some of the police cases that you find impressive? You know, one case as well. This case is amazing. There was a landing and alien contact, something like that.
When I started, I knew of about 6 or 7 cases. So I knew that some police officers had already reported sightings, and but I kind of suspected that there would be hundreds, and it turned out there were hundreds. So the database is not just made up of reports made directly to me. It's made up of a combination of historical cases from books and magazines, and then there's a huge section from newspaper clippings where the officers are interviewed and their names are given, etc. And then there's mine. So it's like 3 main sources to create the database. But of the many officers that have contacted me, there are some standout cases. I can think of one from a police officer called Eric Raymond, who was with 2 other police officers in a rural setting at 3 a.m. in the morning near London, but they're out in the countryside, and they're having cigarettes. They're just having a chat. 2 police vehicles. They've just met up. They're just having a little break, and then suddenly on the horizon they see a flash, and it's just a bright light way off in the distance, but right on the horizon, and it's too far away to make out what it is. Don't really pay any attention to it. But 5 minutes later, suddenly, about 400 meters away from them, which in a rural location is very close, suddenly an object just appears. A huge object appears at about 500 feet altitude. This object is the size of, they would describe 300 or 400 feet wide. It's huge, akin to a mothership, and there were 6 smaller objects flying around the outside. So 6 smaller craft, no noise, and then it was scanning the terrain. It was putting a wide beam down, scanning the terrain. No noise, slowly moving left to right. One of them went to report it, and the others said, well, what are you going to say? And they're just there in awe, and they watch it for about silently going past, and then suddenly disappears in the blink of an eye, gone. So that was an impressive one. I've had others where huge triangles, two uniformed police officers were in a police vehicle and they were parked up, this is near Oxford, and they were parked up in a vehicle, and this is evening, and suddenly they see the sky going dark, and they look up and there is a huge black triangle very close to their position. But they described it as the size of 3 football fields. Wow. And I said, well, how do you know it was the size of 3 football fields? And they said, because we were sat next to 3 football fields, which is a great reference point. Yeah, so that's what you do. It's a validation point. Evidentially, it's, you know, why do you think it's 10 o'clock when this happened? Oh, I always put the kettle on at this time when that TV program. It's called validation. And so when they came back and said it was the size of 3 football fields, why? Because we're next to 3 football fields. It was a brilliant representation of the size. And they watched it for about 5 minutes again, and then suddenly it just went straight up and gone. No noise, straight vertical ascent and gone. So why, amazing. You know, absolutely. And when you get sightings like this of repeated, often triangles, but when you get a cluster of sightings reported close to each other, you know that something's happening. For example, I remember in 1 week, I got 3 reports from 3 different areas of Great Britain, all reporting the same type of event. And the same type of event was this: people driving along on lonely country roads, often with their children, and then suddenly a light will come and fly alongside the car. So as they're travelling along the road, the object will travel alongside at about 10 feet high, hedgerow, and the people are terrified. They think all manner of things are going to happen, and then suddenly it will veer off. Now, in 1 week, I got 3 independent of people. They didn't know each other, and they told exactly the same story. They're driving along country road, object the size of a car runs parallel with them for about a mile or so and then veers off. Now, when you hear that, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up because you realise how real this is. How could 3 people totally unaware of each other around Britain report exactly the same thing? And it's a great validation moment that you realise these things are absolutely taking place. So those kind of things happen. But the police officers, the biggest case that I've got is a case involving at least 24 British police officers, 2 RAF police officers, and a military meteorologist at RAF Cosford. That's from 1993. It's a well-known case. Most of the cases I get are historical. Yeah, police officers generally, if they're serving, do not report it at the time to me. They're too fearful. The most common reason they don't report it is because they fear ridicule and a perceived risk to their career, which, as I know, to my cost in some ways, is a very real threat. So basically, the accounts I get are historical. I got one a couple of weeks ago from, again, a guy who a retired police officer who drew a superb drawing, really detailed drawing of the underside of a triangle that he'd seen above his police car, right above his police car, literally 100 feet above his police car. And he was lit up in a blue light, which we know could be quite dangerous, the blue light, and he didn't get out the car, but everything is illuminated outside blue, and he was frightened to get out of the vehicle. As soon as the light went out, he got out, and he looked up and he saw the underside of the craft. So it's perhaps a good reason why he didn't get out, because he might have got hurt if we think of the Chupa Chupa and things like that from Brazil. So, but yeah, no, I get all manner of cases. Not so many now because my focus is the magazine, and I'm doing many other things. About 3.5 years ago, I was all set to publish a book on my police sightings, and I probably got about 60% of the work done, intending to publish the book. And then I got asked to get involved in researching Rendlesham Forest for a new documentary, Capel Green, which started off as a small project and has just grown and grown and grown. And here we are 3.5 years later, and it should come out this summer. But it's a massive thing, and the amount of new information, witnesses, the amount of old information that I've uncovered during the last 3.5 years of my reinvestigation is that this will be a major documentary. And I am now writing a book on my reinvestigation of the Rendlesham Forest case. And all this new information and a lot more will be in it. Because obviously you can get a lot more into a book than you can into a documentary. But even now, I'm still finding out new testimony, and in fact, I've never mentioned it yet, and I'm still waiting for some verification of military photographs, documents. But I'm not going to go into detail in case it doesn't pan out. But I have literally got one of the most exciting new accounts from a non-police officer but a military witness who was there, who has an absolutely incredible account. And if he verifies his documentation and photographs of him in service, etc., then I will go public with it in the book. But it's as good as any account yet on Rendlesham Forest, and it's an amazing story that I've just unearthed in the last 4 weeks. So I still look.
Yeah, the Rendlesham Forest will be one of the questions they're going to ask you. So
yeah,
let's do it.
There's certain things that I can say because of the film, and there's certain things that I can't say, but I will try to answer the question.
Of course. But well, Rendlesham Forest case occurred in 1980. So what's your opinion about the case? A resume about the case. What's your opinion about it? Was it an extraterrestrial aircraft? Was it a secret aircraft? What was it?
So you want me to give you my conclusions now, when the book's not even out?
Just a little bit spoiler.
And bear in mind, I've been looking at this case as a researcher since 2007, when I first met Colonel Charles Holt, who wrote the Holt Memo. I had a 7-year collaboration period with him between 2007 and 2014. So I've been researching this now this will be the 13th, 14th year. My opinion, based on all of the testimony and all of the research that I've done, is that we're clearly dealing with something that's non-human, almost certainly extraterrestrial, in my opinion. And there's been a lot of books come out recently about saying that it was some kind of a military exercise involving plasma, involving holograms. No, we didn't have that technology. And for example, you probably think of Rendlesham Forest as maybe sightings on 2 or 3 occasions. We're looking at sightings on 15 plus occasions over the same period of time. Yeah? So 15 different occasions, 15 different times objects are seen, at least. And that's what I know of. So the Capel Green and my book will rewrite the narrative. And unfortunately, with Rendlesham Forest, it's probably the most unusual case of the major cases because of the politics involved. And what I mean by politics is there's a whole lot of internal agendas by some of the military witnesses who were involved. And most people just don't realize that these agendas are at play. but in my book, they will become self-evident that each of the three principal witnesses, Holt, Penniston and Burroughs, have each got their own agendas, and some have got joint agendas, and that all I'm trying to do is establish the truth, but the truth is often hidden in agendas. And so there is a political side that doesn't exist, as far as I can see, in any of the world's top cases. If you look back at Roswell, it's basically an alleged UFO crash, and the government tried to cover it up. None of the witnesses are fighting with each other who were involved. Well, in Rendlesham, the witnesses are all fighting with each other, and if you need to be well aware of the case to begin to understand what's going on. And there's never been a breakdown of what's going on, but it will be in my book. That will be in the third section. The first section of the book is the way the case was viewed and the research completed until 2017. And then I become involved in this new documentary, so I begin a reinvestigation of the whole case. So then the middle section is post reinvestigation, right? So you've got a before, then my reinvestigation, and the final thing will be conclusions and agendas, because for the first time, clear pictures can be formed, I think.
Oh, I want to read it a lot. As I said,
AJ wants me to publish it in Brazil.
Yes,
so
please.
We've already agreed.
Great.
It will be.
Great. As I said, there's a great controversy about the participation of some military witness in the case. Warren said he was there, but John Burroughs and Jim Penniston do not confirm this.
But what makes Rendlesham different, other than perhaps Colares, which was over 4 months, the investigation, but all of that, the best part of it is still secret. So we know that lasted at least 4 months. What made Rendlesham different is we're talking a nuclear weapons base. So why do I think UFOs turn up? They come and do a nuclear weapons inspection. We have new testimony where one of the people inside the weapons storage area, he's now come forward, he's named, he will be in the documentary, and he was inside when the UFO was beside the weapons storage area, the nuclear weapons storage area, and it's shone a beam down in a grid-like search of the hot row nuclear bunkers. So it was like conducting some kind of test. We've never had that before. It was rumour, but now we have a witness. So you have essentially a series of nights. Now, for a long time, the narrative has been that there are just 3 nights of consecutive UFO incursions in and around the base and the forest. Okay, so what you've got is 2 twin bases, RAF Bentwaters, RAF Woodbridge, and in the middle is Rendlesham Forest. So we start to see a number of sightings both on the bases and in the forest between the bases over several consecutive nights. This is what makes it different. This is not a one-off event. This is a series of incursions over several nights. Now, the debate until now is that there is just 3 nights. I will argue that there are more nights, and I can't go into that, but I'm going to say that the testimony will say that there's even more events before what is the accepted narrative and after the accepted narrative based on my reinvestigation. Okay, so this is a very unusual sequence of events, multiple sightings, multiple witnesses, not just security police officers. We're talking air traffic controllers, we're talking other military personnel who are doing different technical jobs on the base and now coming forward. So this is a very major event because it's the base at the time was the frontline nuclear base in the United Kingdom. So if the Soviet Union said that we're going to try to take over Western Europe, they will be there with their aircraft to go fight against the Soviet advance. They were a front line, and that's why they had nuclear weapons. There were tactical nuclear weapons that were attached to aircraft jet fighters. Now, I know that because prior to joining the police, I served 6 years in the Royal Air Force as a police officer. And for 3 of my 6 years, I guarded aircraft armed with nuclear weapons. So I did exactly the same job as what those security police officers did at RAF Bentwaters and Woodbridge. So that's why I have a strong inclination for the case. I did exactly the same job. I know the intimate side of being inside the weapons storage areas, being on mobile patrols, responding to various alerts, convoys and things like that. So I have a kind of a unique perspective. So I knew that there were many more witnesses, and there are many more witnesses. And so what most people don't realise with Rendlesham is that, you know, people say, well, why would UFOs be interested in nuclear weapons? Well, we will know as researchers that there's a long correlation over 75 years of UFOs and being seen in the vicinity of nuclear weapon storage areas, power plants, etc., etc. But what most people don't realise is that at the time of late December 1980, the world was in a very dangerous place. In Poland, the shipyard workers led by Lech Wałęsa under the Solidarność revolution movement were threatening to destabilize Poland. Now, Poland was part of the Soviet Union. We're talking the height of the Cold War. And historically, when that had happened in Czechoslovakia and in Hungary, the Soviet Union rolled in with the tanks and aircraft and put down the uprising. So at the time of Rendlesham, hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were massing on the Polish borders. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops massing on the Polish border. So it looked like it was going to be...
This is new.
Yeah, no, it's been there all the time, but people don't realise the context.
Yeah.
Context is very important in any issue. You know, it's like editing. You can make anybody look like a fool with clever editing. Context is the same thing. It's absolutely vital to put something in its context, because without the context, you may have a totally different understanding of what's going on. So in the context of why UFOs and nuclear weapons, here's the key. So you have hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops massing on the Polish border, and it looks like they're going to roll in and put down the shipyard workers. The other thing, so that's one world crisis. The second world crisis that was going on at the time was the Iranian hostage crisis. 52 Americans were being held by Iran, and this was all in the news every day. So this is a Middle East powder keg. So you've got 2 areas of the world in a volatile situation. Now, the thing that makes Rendlesham anxious, especially for the senior officers involved, is that they don't want to admit that it was a nuclear weapons base. But here's more important, is why we can prove that it's a nuclear weapons base. Many of the airmen that we've interviewed for Capel Green will say, I protected nuclear weapons. So that's not an issue. The problem was how much nuclear material was held in RAF Bentwaters in its weapons storage area than what was allowed. There were armament agreements between the United States and Britain. Now, Colonel Holt told me on the first night I met him that there were more nuclear weapons at Bentwaters than anywhere in Europe. Now, that shouldn't have happened. Yeah? So they'd lied about the amounts that were being stored there. And that's the key to this story as to why UFOs turn up. So at a time of world uncertainty, UFOs come out and check out how many nukes we've got, because they shouldn't have been there. And they perhaps represent some kind of unknown threat element that we're not even aware of. But that's why I think they turn up there, because there were more nuclear weapons there that shouldn't have been there. and now makes sense as to why UFOs turn up.
Yeah, this book will be explosive.
It should be. Fingers crossed.
Well, another subject is a focus in the recent accusations against Nick Pope, claiming that he was not who he was said to be, or rather, he was not doing the job at the MOD he always claimed to have done. What do you think of all of this?
There is clear documentation that proves what his role was. Through Freedom of Information Act, the MOD have published several documents that clearly point out what he did and really what he didn't do. Did he work on the UFO desk for 3 years between 1991 and 1994? Yes, he did. But was he a researcher, investigator? No, he wasn't. It's in printed material. Only 20% of his duties, 20% of his day-to-day duties, were dealing with telephone calls and letters from the public and some UFO reports that were coming through that were reported to the police, and they eventually ended up in this one-person office, his. So he's a one-man band. He is a junior desk officer, which is a junior clerk. 20% of his time was devoted to answering phone calls about UFOs, looking at telexes, as it was in the old style of communications, printed telexes that would come in from all around the country, most of which were just filed. He had the ability to make some phone calls. Did he leave the office and research? No, he didn't. That was not his job. So he was never a researcher like you or I, has never investigated cases properly, never went face to face with people. So in reality, he's done very well for himself because the press, shall we say, allowed him to get away with it. They just accepted whatever he said, and they put him down as the head of the UFO program. He probably wouldn't have said that, but he certainly didn't correct them. And so from his point of view, he has become the go-to person in the world for TV documentaries based on a myth. The myth that he was a researcher when he wasn't. I personally, and I've met Nick many times. We've been in several documentaries together. And I've always believed that he was a plant within the UFO community, especially to get to America, to get embedded in America, to feed information back. And his role, I believe, has always been to control the narrative. If he becomes the go-to guy around the world, he can shape the narrative on whether UFOs are real or not, because he's a voice. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that in 1996, whilst he was still serving in the mini MOD, but 2 years after he'd left the UFO desk, he went public in a prestigious live interview on the BBC. And it was called BBC Two Newsnight, and it was the top political program of the day. His book hadn't even been released, but he managed to get on to the most prestigious political program, and he was interviewed by Peter Snow, which was one of the top political journalists of the time. And basically, he was asked, Nick, so Nick, you're publishing this book. What do you think these things are? And he says unequivocally, 1990, I believe that some UFOs are extraterrestrial. Now, how often have you heard him say that since? You very rarely have heard anything like that since. But what would he need if he needed to be embedded into the UFO community? He'd need a vehicle, a project, a book. He would need to officially come out and say, I believe in ET, which is what he did on that program. And so here was the UFO community going, way, we've got somebody on the inside now saying they believe in UFOs. Great, you're welcome here. And so everybody welcomed him with open arms. But all the opportunities since on live television, he has had more opportunities around the world on live television, and certainly in the UK on live television, they're all saying to him, Nick, you worked at the MOD desk. What do you think they are? And he'll go, well, I don't know. There's some very compelling cases, but I'm not quite sure. You were at the citizens' hearings, were you? I was. I was a witness at the citizens' hearings in Washington, and I knew what he would say. And so you have all these witnesses that say it's E.T., 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 to all of the 6 congressmen and women and the 1 senator there, Mike Gravel. Congressman Merrill Cook says to Nick, so Nick, you worked at the MOD for 3 years in the MOD desk. You've heard all this testimony. What do you think it is, Nick? Do you think it's extraterrestrial? So if it was me or you, we'd say it's E.T. without a question of a shadow of a doubt. He went, well, I don't know. It's a very interesting question. There's some really compelling cases, but in the end, I'm not quite sure. Now, how can you be so sure in 1996, but here you are in 2013 at the citizens' hearings and you don't know, and you're supposed to be the top guy? So I think he's always been playing to a wider audience to control the narrative, and his principal role was to control Rendlesham Forest. That's the serious point. Yeah, to control the narrative. Basically, they placed him in a position where he could influence what people thought about Rendlesham Forest. He will never say that Rendlesham Forest was E.T. because I think his handlers don't want him to. So with him, I'll put this to him over dinner, and I'm sat 3 feet away from him over dinner, just the 2 of us, and I say, Nick, I think you're a plant within the UFO community, and he does this. He looks down at his feet, breaks eye contact. As a former police officer trained in advanced interviewing, what does that tell me? Got something to hide. I can't prove it, but it's a pretty good non-verbal communication that I've hit a nerve. So there you go. But interestingly, we'd never had a problem. We were always amiable and friendly until I started investigating Rendlesham again. And then he's now saying I should be arrested because I'm perpetrating.
Really?
Yes, really. Oh, he's very nasty about me now. He's changed. I've got several Facebook screen grabs. They're in black and white. He's doing some very bad things behind the scene about me. And I've got it all in writing. So that will be in the book. There will be a chapter on Nick Pope, the man from the ministry. But suffice to say that he thinks I should be arrested because I am perpetrating a hoax on the UFO community by making this documentary, April Green. And that's because he is adamant now that Larry Warren, who was the original military whistleblower, made it all up, borrowed somebody else's story, and it's a lie. Well, I can tell you as a former police officer who've interviewed all the relevant people that there is corroboration to Larry Warren being there and being witnessed what he said he witnessed. Now, that's the story that they don't want to come out. So he is now not involved in this. He was offered the opportunity and he walked away. He didn't want it. He said it's a fraud. But he's never spoken to me about it, never approached me, and then suddenly just started to go on the offensive and say Gary's committing a fraud, and if he was in the police, he'd be getting disciplined for bringing a hoax on the UFO community. Tiago, think about it. Do I look like I'm a stupid person? Why would I risk my professional career to tell a lie that would easily be found out? And the answer is I'm not going to. And anybody that knows me well knows that I'm only after the truth, and I will stick to the truth. And if I'd found evidence that Larry Warren had lied about this aspect, I would have said so. But there is evidence that corroborates his account. And that's what they don't want to come out. Because they don't really want to talk about little aliens being seen in a field and maybe the base commander of 12,000 people meeting in a field with some kind of entity, which is what Larry Warren had described. Is there evidence to corroborate that? Yes, there is, from a number of accounts. So this is the real story of Rendlesham, of what you're not being told. So again, this is a complicated book, but I've spent 3.5 years researching this. And it's clear to me now that there are several agendas at play, and they've always been at play, and there are certainly agendas now. I mean, what people don't realise is that I was trolled for 3.5 years by some very nasty online Facebook trolls who called me this, that, and the other, made up all sorts of stuff, effing and blinding and swearing about me. I'm this, I'm that. Nick Pope was regularly in contact with these people. He was, in a sense, praising them for their work in trolling me and the magazine, because anything that was disagreed with these trolls, you got trolled, you got abuse. And that's what makes them trolls. Because if you've got to win your argument by using personal abuse, then you've lost the argument, in my opinion. I never resorted to those tactics. And I've got all those screen grabs, and again, that will be all covered in the book. Guess what? All the trolls reported back to Colonel Hull. So this goes quite high up about this one specific thing. You've got to kill the Larry Warren story.
I'm willing to read this book, you know.
It's complicated, but hopefully I'll be able to do it in a way that's never really been dealt with before.
Great. Gary, how do you see the UFO research today in Britain and in the world? Has the UFO research stopped in time? You know, we just looking for back cases, no new great cases.
No, I think the world has changed post December the 16th, 2017. That's the date of the New York Times article, The Pentagon Admissions, the 3 FLIR videos, the Go Fast Gimbal, etc. Those US Navy videos have changed the equation. Because whatever the motives are, they've now been confirmed as authentic and unidentified. They did and were taken by US Navy pilots. And what was really important is that the former head of that, Luis Elizondo, admitted that these things are real and they are flying around in the US airspace. Now, the debate about what they are is just happening now. But the key thing, admission was that these things are real and that they're flying around and they appear to be far in advance of anything that America possesses. But there is actually only 3 alternatives. It's either secret American technology, it's secret foreign technology, Chinese, Russian, or it's non-human. Now, if you talk to the pilots and the technical officers who've been involved in, say, the USS Nimitz incident, which was the first video from 2004, listen to what they say. And they say this is nothing like this is so far in advance, they think it's extraterrestrial. So what do I think? I think we're now dealing in a different world. Because after 2017, December 2017, the press cannot keep ridiculing us anymore. Okay, it effectively put one foot in the mainstream media by giving it validity and saying, look, actually, the head of the Pentagon secret program is saying these things are real and they're flying around. And people are happy to now move the conversation about where they're from. They might not want to talk about ET, but that's not the point. It's opened the door to mainstream. And what we do know now, over the last 3 years since that occurred, is that there's a lot of scientific interest now, mainstream media interest that there wasn't before. No longer are we getting introduced with funny old signs and making a joke. Now there's some serious discussions taking place. And as we go into early 2021, we know now that there is a US Navy task force already in operation to study UAP, the popular name. I still like UFOs, but UFO, UAP phenomena. I think UFO is far more sexy, to be honest, but there you go. But anyway, the UAP, UFO phenomena, and they have got recent legislation was passed in late December in America that says that the US Navy have to supply a written report based on an investigation into the US Navy task force findings about these things that are flying around, and it will be presented to the Senate by around the end of June, early July. So that's going to be, I think, a momentous time, or potentially a momentous time. So going back to your question, should there be some kind of cooperation going on? Should we be getting involved with science a lot more? Yes. And I think that you will find that behind the scenes things are going on between countries, and I think that there will be some very interesting developments before that Navy report is released, probably around the 1st of July. So keep watching the space. I do think there will be some interesting things to develop, and I think maybe me and you know a little bit more about that, but we can't just share that.
Great. To finish, Gary, what can we expect from a UFO research for the present and for the future?
It's a good question. I think it's an enormous question, and if for example the Navy report is published, it could a lot of the material could be in a classified section, and we might not get told about it. But I suspect that because of the mainstream interest now, they will have to give us something like, oh, we've investigated blah blah blah, and we found an extra 12 cases, blah blah blah. Now that might be really interesting because there might be 12 more videos, and that, you know, I think things will come from it. The point is that the genie is out of the bottle. So now we're having serious discussions. I think we're on the brink of a major breakthrough. For the first time in my life, this is the closest I feel we're coming to what we all kind of hope for, is disclosure with a big D. Which means that everybody, the man on the street, is suddenly told, actually, if these things are real, and they could well be extraterrestrial or non-human. What is clear is that these objects operate with intelligence. What happened at Rendlesham Forest was intelligent. The manoeuvres, the grid-like searches that were witnessed, the scan beam across the weapons storage area, this was an intelligent act. They were investigating something. Quite why, we don't know. But the point is that after 75 years, we can pretty much draw a conclusion that these things are real, fly around, they act with intelligence, and the real question is, where are they from? Now, that could be a huge question, because people now talk about multi-dimensional, multi-universe, these kind of things that were not speculated 20 years ago, but now we have to be open to that. But the point is, they're not human by our normal definition of the term human. They're not man-made, as it were, and that's the key thing. And so we're still on a voyage of discovery, but I think we're on the verge of a very exciting time, because I think it won't be too long, hopefully, before people, the man on the street, my main role in life, I guess, for getting involved in UFO research is not to research and get material for the UFO community, which is a relatively small community. I want to reach the man on the street who thinks that there's nothing to this subject. And I just want to reach the man on the street, the bricklayer, the plumber, the doctor, and so that they become aware that actually there is something really going on. And that's a huge, huge psychological shift that the public and the world, business, finance, used to this. They're not even aware of this. They still, 95, 98% of people think it's rubbish. And then suddenly they've got a big awareness. So I think one of the roles of an international group, if they were to come together, would be to create an awareness program of just trying to educate the public as to actually some of the history that you've not been told about, and some of the characteristics that researchers have established over many years, the silence, EM effects, that kind of thing. That there is really good research for a long time. And I think there will be a greater crossover of mainstream ufology and science. Because whilst we've been ridiculed as not as science, and we're not scientists per se, we have great knowledge and expertise between us, at least the best ones have. And people like Stanton Friedman, etc. You know, he was a physicist, And that guy for 70 years went public about all his sightings. Even though he never had a sighting of his own, he could just look at the evidence from the best cases of military pilots, commercial pilots, air traffic controllers, police officers, etc., around the world, and say we're dealing with something real. If you go back to Dr. James McDonald in the 60s, he did exactly the same. He was a top eminent scientist, and he reviewed the best cases, and he said, this is real. You know, we should be having open congressional hearings and dealing with this properly. Well, I think the Pentagon admissions that came from December 2017 have now opened that conversation, and we're now in a much better place to be taken seriously, and just admitting that these things are flying around is a huge thing. We can discuss all they want, but if you think about it, the three alternatives, it's American stealth, but the Americans aren't saying that. It's foreign, Russian or Chinese. Well, that's terrifying if it was true. That's as terrifying in man-made terms than actually ET, because they're not attacking us. But yeah, if they're real, the Russians and the Chinese have really got a 50-year jump in technology ahead of the US, then they're not the superpower anymore.
I prefer ET hypothesis.
And the point is, the link to, going back to the link with UFOs and ET, is I've always speculated, and UFOs are seen coming in and out of water. I suspect there are underground bases in our deepest trenches, and it's their home too. So they would be very interested in preserving their habitat, just like we would. So that's why I think that they've got an interest in the nuclear weapons aspect.
That's it. Well, great. I can't agree more. Thank you very much, Gary, for your time.
You're welcome anytime.
I'm sure that my audience will love it. And, well, you're always welcome to be here with us.
Let's get the film out, let's get the book out, and then let's chat again, because then I'll be able to talk about a lot of the new stuff that's never been mentioned before.
Yeah, sure. Então é isso, pessoal. Queria muito agradecer a presença de vocês. Espero que vocês tenham gostado da nossa entrevista. E todos os links do Gary, como assinar a revista UFO Truth, vai estar aqui na descrição do vídeo. Espero que vocês tenham gostado. É isso, um abraço e até mais.